Good evening. Welcome to the International Spy Museum. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education here, and we are delighted to have you with us for Rumrunning, Codebreaking, and the Last 12 Miles with Erika Robuck and Ellen McCarthy. Erika, who is nearest to me, is the national best-selling author of biographical fiction, including The Invisible Woman and Sisters of Night and Fog, based on the true stories of World War II spies. She will be interviewed about her new book, The Last 12 Miles, by Ellen, farther away, but dear to my heart, who has formerly been Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, Chief Operating Officer of the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, and Director of Intelligence Operations Strategy and Policy for the United States Coast Guard. And that Coast Guard stint is going to come in really handy talking about the women in question this evening. So after Ellen and Erika have their conversation, we will take questions from the in-person audience at the standing microphone over there. And please do use that because we record all of our programs for YouTube and we want your dazzling questions to show up. And then I will also be taking questions from our virtual audience. And for those wonderful people, please, as usual, type them in via the Q&A feature so that I can get to all of them. Okay, housekeeping over. Over to you, Ellen and Erika.
All right.
Thank you, Amanda, and Chris Costa, who runs this place and is a dear friend and has just done a bang-up job of making this the must-see place to go to when coming to DC or just living in DC. So thank you. I also would like to thank Virginia Hall.
Yes.
And so while tonight is not about Virginia Hall, it was really Virginia Hall that brought me to Erika in The Invisible Woman. And I got a chance to interview you for your book on The Invisible Woman. And ever since then, 3 books later, we've become fast friends.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity to get some time with you to go through this next adventure.
Thank you.
Because Erika, you really are amazing.
Thank you.
You know, It's funny, Erika writes historical fiction, but I dare you to find anything in it that she hasn't already qualified as fiction because it's, you know, you do your research, you do your homework. And so, you know, I think of you, if you read one of Erika's books, you walk away always much smarter on whatever it is you're writing about. So I'm excited, but I'm particularly excited about this particular point in history. As somebody who is Irish and drinks a lot, Prohibition was not my favorite era. In fact, I really don't get it, but here we are. And you know, just as a little bit of an icebreaker, this novel is set during Prohibition.
Yes.
So something I don't know about you, but what is your favorite cocktail?
It's the Bahama Queen from the book. The Bahama Queen is named after the OG woman rum runner Cleo Lithgow, who you will meet in chapter 2. And it has to do with a little bit of bourbon barrel gin, which I'd never tried until this book. Little Grand Marnier, various fruit juices, muddled mint, and it is divine. So I highly recommend it while reading it, that you mix that up, get the shaker going, and then off you go.
You keep saying on the beach, and while I think this would be a great book to read on the beach, I didn't read it on the beach. I read it in the cold of winter and loved it.
Escapist. There you go.
There you go. But has this always been your favorite drink?
No. I just tried it with this.
And now it's your favorite drink.
Now it's my favorite drink. And the first time I tried it, I was on a podcast. It's called Dedicated with Doug Brunt, and he made it for the first time. And that was the first time I tried it, and it was phenomenal.
Well, I think I'm going to have one now.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those of you who've not gotten your shot glasses, please get them. They are super cool. Thank you, Amanda. So as I mentioned, I got the chance to meet Erika through Invisible Woman, but you know, you've become incredible. I mean, we view you as the women of the intelligence community as a part of our cadre, because you know as much about the intelligence community as most of us who've worked in the intelligence community. And so I think, you know, you've had others tell you that we definitely look at you as one of ours. But a lot of your work has been focused sort of on the human side of the house and CIA. And now you've switched to the signals intelligence side of the house. I mean, how did you find Elizabeth? What led you to move from World War II, CIA and human intelligence to one of the founders of the NSA, one of the two people who inspired the creation of the NSA in cryptanalysis.
Well, you were a huge part of that. So when we were talking about the Invisible Woman, I said to her, who is the next Virginia Hall? And she's like, well, there's nobody who's the next Virginia Hall. And I'm like, okay, who's slightly down from Virginia Hall, but the next Virginia Hall? And immediately you said, there's a cryptanalyst for the Coast Guard that I love, Elizabeth Smith Friedman, and you should maybe look at her life because it spanned the Great War, Prohibition, World War II. She was a Shakespeare scholar. And I was like, okay, great. And I just sort of filed that. And then I went to a book event for Sisters of Night and Fog. And at the question and answer period, a man raised his hand and he said, I don't have a question. I just had a strong feeling that you should write about Elizabeth Smith Friedman and her husband, William. And I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. So I took note, moved on. And then I had another event and a woman brought me a basket of gifts. And it was French resistance jams and all kinds of World War II stuff. And then she said, I stuffed a biography in there for someone I think you might be interested in, but whatever. Great. I get home to my computer and I start looking up Elizabeth Smith Friedman and I see the biography and I look over and it's right there in the basket. So 3 different people, 3 locations, one of them, one of the most respected people I love in the world, Ellen, right here. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to read about Elizabeth Smith Friedman. And sure enough, I was just absolutely captivated by her story and what it spanned. And I just had to zero in on a piece of it, but there's so much more. And there's a lot of further reading suggestions in this book too.
We were just talking a little bit ago. I feel like it's her time. You mentioned that there's a children's book coming out about Elizabeth Friedman.
Yeah, there's a young adult novel. A biography came out a few years ago. This happened with Zelda, and it happened with Virginia Hall. The collective unconscious gets a signal, and we all pick it up separately, and then all of a sudden, everything starts popping at the same time. So it's very cool to be a part of that.
I am so glad she's got her time because she really is bad. You know what?
Yeah, she is. And these women in intelligence, they like to stay in the shadows, but they have to come out at some point. So
right, and it's her time. So thank you for opening the kimono and introducing the world to Elizabeth Friedman. So I mentioned this book is set during Prohibition, and as an Irish person, I never quite understood Prohibition. And Elizabeth's counterpart in this book was also this badass rum runner.
Yes.
Spanish Maria.
Yeah, Marie Waite, yeah.
I mean, tell us a little more about how you found her.
Yes.
And it was just so interesting during a time. I mean, this is very much rum running and code breaking, sort of a man's world, but you have sort of these 2 women who are the best in their class. How did you...
Yeah, well, ask and you shall receive. I like writing about women, and I had Elizabeth, and she had caught a female Axis spy during World War II, but I didn't want to write about World War II again. I had just done 2 novels about it, and it's so dark. It really I needed a break from it. So I started looking at the Prohibition time period and the rum runners, which Key West, booze, all right, I'll research that. And I started going through the old newspapers, the old Coast Guard files, National Archives, and I found a man named Charles Waite. And then I found in the newspaper archive, Mr. C.W. Waite and Mrs. C.W. Waite have opened up a dance academy. And I'm looking at Charles and trying to get into his head and figure out who he is. And I look over at Mrs. C.W. Waite, and then I look back at him, and then I look back at her, and I'm like, wait a minute. And she just had a look in her eye, and it was fierce. And I thought, who is Mrs. C.W. Waite? And I started looking into it, and then all the lore just starts pouring out about this queen of the rum runners, Spanish Marie. And it was her. She just completely captivated my attention from that point on.
That's amazing, because I that's the one part of the book I didn't look up.
Yeah.
But so it was based on some truth in terms of opening a dance studio to present yourself as sort of a legitimate person of society, because that's what Spanish Maria wanted to be.
Yes.
And she was a dancer. And
Elizabeth kind of stumbles on her the same way that I did. So it was exactly how I had found her. I was able to work that in. So
that's so cool. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that, for the most part, people in the intelligence profession, sort of being under the radars are definitely our preferred place. But that makes it harder to sort of figure out who these people are, to learn who they are. I mean, how do you do your research when you've got people, for the most part, don't want to be known?
Well, that's the challenge, and that's the fun for me. I love the research is what I would love. That's all I want to do. If I could just go to the National Archives and just go through files for the rest of my life, I would be perfectly happy. I do have to do something with that. But for this one, they have all the Coast Guard records from the dawn of time. So you're with these great big log books and files, newspaper clippings. All of it's been declassified from that time, at least everything I saw. And so I find the time period that I'm going to work with. And once I have the time period, I exhaust every single area of that time period, and then I'm able to start making connections. Kind of similar with Virginia Hall. Once I know the city that she goes to, if I start doing research on the city and the time outside of her, I can start to see where everything comes in. So it's like putting a big puzzle together, and that's the fun part to me. So with that, also there is a wonderful archive on the Friedmans. The NSA Museum is not far from where I live, so I spent a lot of time there. They had a nice exhibit running about Elizabeth for a while. It's not there, but they always have William stuff. And then the George Marshall Foundation down in Virginia has a wonderful Friedman archive. Now, a lot of it was during COVID and they hadn't opened back up, and then they had renovations. But the archivist there, I would just tell her, I need this file from 1926. And we were able to do a lot of that together.
So we were just chatting a little before we started. So you fill in the gaps with what you sort of, what inspired, what you think, based on the knowledge that you gained and understanding of these characters. So that's how you fill it in. Where is an area? So now that I think I look up everything that you write about, but clearly I've missed a couple things. What is one of the bigger gaps that you?
Well, in Spanish, Marie Waite, that's the name that she was kind of given as part of the lore. It's one thing you want to create a character and a persona, especially at this time period, because the newspapers had so much fun with the rum runners and the feds. To them, it was a big game. And so there was a lot of lore, a lot of silly stories, a lot of names and, monikers and things. So when I started going through all of that, you have to pull it from it's almost like gossip. And so that was actually really frustrating for me. I like the facts. I don't like gossip. I don't like fiction. I'm not actually very creative.
You don't like
I'm good at finding things.
Disinformation.
I don't like missing or disinformation, right? And so for me, that's the part that drives me crazy. So I have to find everything I can. And then whatever crimes against history I commit, I put in the author's note, because it just would drive me crazy to not tell you that I made a hybrid character of a Coast Guardsman, because I couldn't have 7 Coast Guardsmen. I gave you one guy, So, but yeah, that's.
We were talking about Elizabeth's aide was Anna?
Anna Wolf.
And now I want to find out more about her, because I was so, Elizabeth sort of brought her in, taught her trade. She became, according to the book, she became pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Now I'd love to know what she did with it. I know you said it's been hard to find anything on her.
Well, and I think she went off the radar, because Elizabeth was the first woman to head a unit of code breakers for the Coast Guard, and she thought, great, I'm going to find women and men to work together, and there weren't any women who were qualified. So even her protege had moved on. Right. So it's one of those.
I would love to know what happened
frustrating
to her.
things. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's not that many women in that field. So,
right?
Do you think you'd be able to find her? So what were the gems from the history that fascinated you the most? What was your favorite part of sort of this era?
Well, the weirder it is in this book, the truer it is. Because as I said, I don't have a good imagination. So I found these crazy little anecdotes. There were, Elizabeth decoded every message they intercepted. And not every message was, I'm going to meet you on the beach, at this time under this moon. Some of it was, I need a pair of underwear, size XXL. Some of it, and the funniest one was, I lost my glass eyeball off the coast of Charleston. So could you find another one for me and ship it out? But another one was, your wife had twins. He writes back, I'm not married. And so these are the kinds of things she's catching. But my favorite was baby Betty. You meet her in chapter 1. A rum runner used his baby girl as a decoy so that when the Coast Guard would board his boat, they would think, well, nobody would be running rum with a baby on board. But then the newspapermen got to him, and the article says, it talks about how Betty is a rum runner baby, and that when she is on decks, nobody uses any curse words. They wait till she's below decks taking her nap. She plays with empty bottles. It's like the most bizarre story. And there's a picture of this baby and that was in the Coast Guard files, glued onto a file folder. And you could just see, like the Coast Guardsmen or Elizabeth in her office, them having a good laugh, but also like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life, buddy? So it was those kinds of things. I don't want to say too many of them because they're funny and I could never have come up with them. They're just outrageous.
that chapter really was such a great place to start. It just so captures you because you see that, there really was not good and bad. That's such an interesting period in history.
Yeah.
Not everything was black and white. Even the folks who were the rumrunning, they were still human beings. And he sounded like he was actually a pretty cool dad. It sounds like he was hiding behind his baby, but he really wasn't. He was just a working dad.
I love boats. My boys love it. They would be fine with it.
Right.
Do what you got to do.
Right. So
no, but it's the time period that we meet these rum runners. It's pretty early in the game, so it's a lot of small time operators. It's Uncle Billy and his little skiff off of this, and Aunt Mildred with her still in the basement. So it started out as sort of small time hijinks, and then money comes into it. And when you can make money, it attracts sharks in the water to blood. And so as the operations get bigger and they get more complicated, and then they have to become more complicated because they're on the radar of the feds, and then the mafia gets wind of it, and then they realize they can make money. So we're in a transitional stage between sort of the smaller owner-operators and organized crime, and then what that did to the trade, and really the legacy that is left. Because after Prohibition was over, all of those trafficking channels just kind of continued, but with drugs.
With doing other stuff.
Yeah. So it's still very relevant. And the growth of the Coast Guard was so much due to Elizabeth at that time. She decoded 12,000 messages in a really short amount of time. And because the offshore patrollable waters had grown, the Coast Guard needed more boats. And so a lot of her work and their success led to the growth of the Coast Guard.
And she, for the most part, was doing all of the decoding. It was
everything.
That's pretty amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah, she was a genius.
And a mom and a wife.
Yeah, and just sort of had it all together.
Right.
Side note for code breakers, cryptanalysts, aficionados of the science, if you were really into that, this is probably not the book for you. No, I said, I've tried for about 3 minutes. I said, Elizabeth likes Shakespeare. I like Shakespeare. She learned off of letter codes. I'm gonna try this. And 3 minutes later, I was like, oh my gosh, that was awful. Yeah. I'm just going to leave that to. So there are a lot of excellent books on the Friedmans and cryptanalysis. And this is not one of them. This is about their private lives. So
I think it's a great one. It's funny you should say that.
No, I mean, silly.
Yeah, but it's it shows. Again, so you look at Humant and Virginia Hall and the physical issues she was dealing with. The Friedmans were dealing with they were mental issues, high stress issues.
Yes, and William suffered a lot because of it. And William Friedman, if you don't know about him, was he worked as part of what was then known as the Black Chamber and various other groups that led to the NSA. And he was a great war veteran, and he came back from that with some post-traumatic stress. And then the work that he was doing was extremely stressful, extremely classified. Of course, he couldn't talk to anybody about it. And he ended up having several nervous breakdowns over the course of his career. He just knew so many things, and the burden of what he knew plagued him quite a bit, which a lot of our friends in the intelligence community, it is a balance of how much of your personal life you're able to put into it. With Elizabeth, I found the things that she was involved in, she was a little bit, I would say, better at compartmentalizing her work versus her home life. So for whatever that's worth.
She was a woman.
Yeah, but well, but you think about too, but feeling and emotion, and she would get too emotionally involved in the cases too, and then have to kind of pull back. So.
But she also had it pretty tough. I mean, so she was a very public figure, right? Because because it was of kind of a public business, and she was going to court.
Mm-hmm. So they're using her as a witness.
She became known, and which is not something you're ever comfortable with, right?
Correct. And then she ended up having to have a security detail because she became so known. Some of the mobsters wanted to take her for a ride. So
it's not being targeted. Probably not fun.
No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty tough.
Yeah.
So how did you? So getting back to. You write historical fiction. How do you balance the historical accuracy with the fictional elements of your story?
Well, I do all the research that I can up front, and I create timelines, and I get everything factual set in place. And then at that point, I let the characters have fun. I have to find in the history where I'm going to set the book, where the natural climax is, and where the character arc, how they're going to change. And then I just let them sort of do what they're going to do. So, through dialogue, obviously, that I have to make up. But I feel like I get to know these people so well I sort of feel like I know what they would say. But, and then, just sometimes I do have to make composite characters because in history, there's a million people. And in a novel, that's just it's not helpful to have a million characters. So that's where I sometimes will have to put people together to make it easier to read as a novel. Just sort of spinning all of that.
I love how you describe this because I can't even write a text.
Oh.
And you just throw them out there and see what happens.
Yeah, they do. They operate in funny ways. Yeah.
I think
Surprise
that's magic.
Me. Mm-hmm.
So, did anything really surprise you during the writing of this book? So as you're throwing it out there and seeing what happens.
Well, I was fascinated that Elizabeth in the 1920s was such a huge figure as a woman in cryptanalysis, because at the time it was mostly men. And then I was fascinated that Marie Waite was the queen of the Rumrunners. And then I was fascinated that Layla Russell was the assistant DA of Miami, and she was a pilot, and that Anna was a code. Like, there were all these women that were involved in great jobs. So it surprised me at that time that there were that many women as key players in this.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I've been
interesting.
because Elizabeth was a working mom. She had
Right.
little kids. Marie was a working mom, and she had little kids. So I don't know. I guess, people need to make a living.
Yeah, and maybe it was the nature of the business. So you look at Virginia Hall again, and the trials she had to get to do the things she wanted to do, and it was very physical. And,
when you're called to do something and
Right.
you're good at it, you usually find a way. So,
So Elizabeth and Marie, they both operated very successfully in very male-dominated industry, intelligence and rum running. As you mentioned, when women rarely worked outside the home. Can you describe some of the challenges that they had to face? And did you find other women? So you mentioned some, but in general, did you just find this was just a great field for women, or what did you find other women that?
I did. Mabel Walker Willebrandt was the Attorney General, I believe, for the United States at the time, and she was kind of not really a loved figure. All these figures in Prohibition were not loved because they were telling people they couldn't drink, and they were, or at least they couldn't buy alcohol, and so they weren't exactly popular on the large scale all the time. But yeah, she was another one of the women that was really out there in history. I think the disadvantage was, they were often underestimated and cast aside, but they also used that to their advantage, because when you're underestimated, you can operate in kind of a different way and sort of manipulate and do what you need to do. So being underestimated has its pluses and minuses.
That's so bad.
And I think for women, as we found with some of the women in spy novels at that time, in World War II, the Nazis did not believe that women had the capacity to do spy work. And so if you are a woman spy, it's actually a little easier to be under the radar because you're not even really being considered as a candidate. And it was similar in Rumrunning when you have these notorious men characters and this little 5'2" Spitfire who's really cute shows up. It's very distracting. And then all of a sudden you've got a gun to the side of your face and So it's really, you're underestimated, but it works to your advantage. So.
Did you feel like the women supported one another? I'm really drawn to Cleo, who is the Bahama Queen.
Yes.
And, she's getting ready to get out of the business, but she sort of sees something in Maria. It seems like. Maybe I got this wrong.
Yeah.
But
wants to pass the torch.
Right. And in a field where you didn't trust anybody.
Yeah, I think she saw Marie as somebody that she could trust in this sea of people she never would have trusted and couldn't trust. And so they had that kinship. But throughout the book, the women are foils for one another. Elizabeth works in groups with lots of women and supports other women, where Marie is very much an independent of everyone. She doesn't want women or men around her. She just wants to get it done. And I have Marie sort of watching Elizabeth at some point and considering, she's got, this attorney, she's working with this person and that person, and maybe my operation would run better if I did have women. But,
too late by then, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Right.
But Elizabeth had better taste in men, it sounds like.
Oh, yes. Marie had terrible taste in men. It was really bad. Yeah. So it was also fun writing them as foils for each other, because you have like this very sweet, supportive marriage and this very toxic, terrible relationship, which was actually really fun to write. So both are very...
completely used him.
Wow.
This is where I really liked Marie, and then I heard this part. Although I guess he was very handsome.
Yes.
So I have this image of
nice
looking, but not
he
much
looked
else.
like Daniel. Who's the blue-eyed Daniel Bond?
Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig. He looks a lot like Daniel Craig, but younger. Yeah. But I think that was his only positive attribute.
Who had a thing for pigeons.
Yeah. Carrier pigeons.
Can you imagine having pigeons in your house?
No.
Okay, so this is Can you describe, you've told me about your writing process, but can you share what your writing process is? Like, how long did it take you to write the novel? How do you do this? Because I've tried to do it. I just can't. I don't have your.
Oh, keep at it.
Yeah.
Hemingway, 500 words a day.
Yeah.
And then you just go fishing and drink. That's all.
Well, I got the other part.
That's my life exactly, actually. No, I usually write, I research for about 6 months before I write any of the fiction. And then it usually takes me a year to write the book. I write for about 4 to 5 hours a day in the morning when my kids are at school or until my brain gives out. And then that's it. And that's also the time when I edit or do more research as I need to. Because with historical fiction, you're never done. I mean, you do need to know the kind of soft drink that would have been served at the Victoria restaurant, which is now Sloppy Joe's. Like it'll take you days to figure out the kind of soda pop that was ordered. So that kind of thing is ongoing, but I love it.
I feel like as I'm reading about Elizabeth Friedman, I felt you because she was sort of the same way. You know,
she would
so sit down,
together.
She would get it all together, but she was she was almost in a trance.
Yes.
Now she is buried in the data and trying to come up with connections. And I feel like that's kind of you.
Yeah, with the writing process, I have nothing to do with cryptanalysis. My mind is not wired that way, but everyone said that William was very technical and she was very mystical. So they would sometimes work together in the same room before it got to some of the more confidential stuff. This is, back during the Great War. And then he would get stuck on something and he would say, I'm going to say a word and you tell me what's associated with it. And he would just say the word. She would give the first association and it would be what would crack what he was working on. He'd spent 5 hours staring at things and they had that. She talked about how she felt like women's intuition helped her solve things, where him, it was very technical and by the book. And with writing, I'm mystical about the process. I do take signs. I have dreams. I have, all of that going on in addition to the practical research side. So that I was able to identify with.
I definitely see that.
Nothing else.
Because she had instincts that were not based in data. It was just, she saw something, remembered something.
And it would crack it wide open.
Right.
Over and over again. So
that
was not a random thing. It happened all the time with her.
And I will say, I did love the relationship with her husband. They were so mutually supportive and they gave each other credit. Mm-hmm. She'd be traveling, going down to Key West and he was taking care of the kids. That was very unusual.
Very unusual for the time. And we were talking beforehand. They were known as America's cryptographic couple, and they would always say that the other was more talented. They were never trying to compete with each other. They were always trying to build the other one up, which was very sweet to read about. They were a very sweet couple. Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope your readers will experience or feel after reading this novel?
Honestly, I want you to have an escape because the world, you need one. So I want this to be escapist fiction. The settings will help with that. But also in terms of theme, you get what you choose. So choose wisely.
Yes. That's great advice. Yeah. So we're going to open up to audience questions in a minute, but can you just give us a little insight into what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I asked my editor, can I tell everybody? And she said, no. But she's not here right now. Yeah. So I will tell you that it is the female Forrest Gump of the 50s and 60s. It was a woman at absolutely every conflict, and you've never heard of her. And she was the most dynamic, fascinating person. I told you a little bit about the book. It does cover a lot of conflict. And I thought, oh my gosh, how are people going to go through a war book? But you're going through it with this character, and she is a delight, and she's a hot mess. And so it's all okay. So, but yeah, I had great fun with it.
I can't wait.
Yeah. So it's going to be 2025. We don't have the month yet. Yeah. So, but I can't wait till I can.
Amanda, I'm available to interview Erika for her next book.
Okay. I like that.
50s and 60s.
It's a date. Mm-hmm. It's a date. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We just need a solid spy connection.
There we go.
National security, all that stuff.
Well, I think we could do it.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there were rumors that this woman might have been involved in the intelligence community.
Of course.
So drill down on that, Erika.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is where I'm going to stop and open it up to the audience.
We have a lot of Zoom questions already, so I can jump on those. As anybody who has a question live in the audience, please go to the microphone, and I'll get started with some of these that have been written in, because I like this one. It's really straight and to the point. Which booze was most popular that was being smuggled during that time?
It depends on the where it's coming from. So there's whiskey from the Bahamas, British, not like from the South, and then from rum from the Caribbean. Champagne was very popular. But yeah, most of the exports in the areas that were coming from were coming from the Bahamas and Cuba. So you got some goodies, a lot of rum through that. Bacardi did a huge campaign at the time in advertising in American periodicals, like, why would you stay in those dry states when you come down to wet Cuba? All of the postcards and everything. So it created quite a travel industry. Yeah. And so the judges who were prosecuting rum runners and bootleggers in the United States and Florida were hung over from their weekends in Bimini. So it was quite an interesting.
And that's where, isn't that where a lot of the rum runners went to live afterwards? They just sort of left and went to Cuba.
Yes.
It was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Sarah. Thank you so much for writing this book. I am working on an education campaign at the Department of Homeland Security to elevate the work of Elizabeth Smith Friedman for her work at the Nebraska Avenue Complex. So I'm thrilled to meet you and learn about your work.
Thank you.
So the work that Elizabeth did on that campus, as I'm sure you have researched extensively, J. Edgar Hoover took credit for.
Oh, yes.
So can you speak a bit about the public perception of her work in the Prohibition rum running era? And besides the mobsters wanting to take her for rides, how the rest of the public kind of conceived of her work and some roadblocks she might have faced in the notoriety that she deserved.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that you're doing that. That's awesome. It was the conundrum of so many in the intelligence community. Virginia Hall experienced this. You do this incredible work and you cannot get publicly known for it. And that is hard, but you want to stay operative. So that's just something you take with the job. But then when someone from another agency comes in and takes credit for it, it's salt in the wound. So the FBI and Elizabeth in her intelligence portion of the Coast Guard, that was really hard. We just meet J. Edgar Hoover right at the beginning when it's just the Bureau of Investigation. He fires all the women as soon as he gets in there and says they can never work there again, and then starts his strange little twisted, but more focus on the American people than on crime and different things. So you get just a hint of their contentious relationship, but it did continue for a long time. And in World War II, she did a lot with Nazis who were in South America and helped intercept, actually save lives by intercepting and breaking code of attacks that were going to be happening in the Pacific. And the FBI was still taking credit for it during that time. The woman Elizabeth helped nab Belvalee Dickinson, the Axis spy operating out of a doll shop in New York. They took credit for that. But she had such a great look at things. She did have some notoriety from her she was called into a lot of courtroom work, and she took it all as it came with a grain of salt. She enjoyed it, and then when it went away, she was happy to be behind the scenes. She was very even-keeled and felt like, I think wherever it took her, that was the adventure of the day. Fine. She did not need the affirmation that Hoover obviously did. She was very confident in who she was. And behind the scenes, everybody knew what was going on. So, yeah, thanks.
We talked a little bit about Spanish Marie, and I said when we began talking about doing this event, I started reading about the real woman, and you said a little bit about how you researched her. If you would share that a little bit.
Yeah, so I found a lot of old rum runner books that had been republished through a small place and then out of print, and I was able to buy a lot of them. And then there were also books about rum running in the Keys, and you see those little local history books where you go places, there'll be a display, they're usually like brown and tan, and they're local history. They're actually a wealth of information. And so she would have a chapter here or a chapter there, and they were always disputing, where did she come from? What was her ancestry? Was she born here? Was she born somewhere else? And it all added up to exactly what she wanted, was with smoke and mirrors so she could operate. So it was really having to put together a huge puzzle. And I don't want to tell a major plot point in the book, but I had to make a decision about whether something that happened was something she orchestrated or not. And I made a decision, and I think it was the right one. But I do mention in the author's note, maybe not. Maybe you would have a different feel, but I think I know her pretty well.
You mentioned a little bit ago just this whole J. Edgar Hoover talk. I'm not a big J. Edgar Hoover fan, by the way. I'll just put that out there for a whole host of reasons, mostly related to the OSS and State Department INR, but we'll leave it there. Virginia Hall, Elizabeth Friedman actually met Wild Bill Donovan.
Yes, she did.
And how'd that go?
So Wild Bill Donovan, if you don't know, great war hero, World War I, and was the head of the OSS, which was the counterpart to the SOE, spies during World War II. He wanted Elizabeth to write code for the OSS and for later organizations, which then became CIA. And she worked on it for a couple of weeks, and she turned it into him. And the only thing I could find from her was that she thought he was brash and impolite. But I think you'd probably own that a little bit. I love him.
Yeah.
But also I didn't have to do any code work for him.
Isn't that an amazing connection, though?
And he actually just came up. He's in the new book he was everywhere.
There we go.
So there is a
Ding, ding,
cameo
ding, ding, ding.
cameo from Wild Bill. I can't get away from him.
But he was a big promoter of women, so it's
he
fun.
was.
Yeah. So
he's like, if you want to go into the belly of the beast and you want to get disguised to do it with your prosthetic leg, do it.
But he was also a big supporter of the analysis side of the house, too. He's very much looked at as the founder of Special Forces, but actually it was the researchers that he said that really he believes that World War II was won based on the blood, sweat, and intellect of the research and analysis.
Yes.
So, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hi. I have a question. Can you tell us a little bit more about Elizabeth's early life and what motivated her to get into the line of work she got into?
Yes.
And also there was some comment about an interest in Shakespeare, if you could fill us in on that.
That's all part of it. So she was the youngest, or she was one of 9 children, born in the Midwest. Loved her mother to death. Her father was a very difficult man, and Elizabeth was obsessed with Shakespeare and literature and wanted to go to college, and he didn't think women should go to college. So she had to fund it herself, and he charged her 6% interest.
Wow.
So she got through that. Her mother
Wait,
died.
can I do that?
As soon as I read that, I was like, what a jerk. And I'm like, wait a minute. Actually, that's an outstanding idea.
Good
Voice.
point.
Yeah.
Good tip.
But So he charged the interest. And so she was working all these jobs in teaching that she didn't want. And had gone to the big city of Chicago to try to find a big job, and was, felt really frumpy in the big town, and was said no by everyone, and ended up at the Shakespeare library there, went in and was complaining to the librarian. And she's like, you like Shakespeare? We have a folio. We have a first folio here. And Elizabeth went to go see it, and they started talking. And she's like, actually, I know a man who runs a think tank who doesn't believe Shakespeare wrote this, who believes that Francis Bacon wrote it, and he's trying to prove it. Would you like to talk to him? And Elizabeth was like, okay. The guy comes to Chicago on a train, takes her back with him, and she goes to live and work at this think tank where she meets William Friedman. He is a geneticist there, and he is also a photographer. So he takes pictures of the text of the folio, and they're looking at the letters to see if there are patterns. And that's all they do all day is try to find patterns in the letters to see if Bacon has this secret pattern that he wrote Shakespeare. Elizabeth and William said he did not. Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, but they wrote a whole book about it. It's called the Shakespeare Ciphers. So their love of Shakespeare brought them together, but then they wanted to try to break it to this man that Shakespeare actually did this. This was discrepancies in printing presses, and I couldn't find a capital B that day, so I used a lowercase, or I flipped it the wrong way because I wasn't paying attention, and he wouldn't hear of it. So they had to take themselves away from him. But he was also, he did have a think tank, and he brought code breakers in because in World War I, the Germans were ahead of us on that, and he wanted to bring people to study it. And William and Elizabeth had gotten very good at solving codes and problems, and before they knew it, they were training code breakers to go into the Great War. And that's what set them off. But the Shakespeare interest remained their whole lives. When they moved to D.C., they were close to the library there, wrote the Shakespeare Ciphers, won an award for it. It's a great read if you're interested in cryptanalysis and Shakespeare.
Did she pay her dad back?
Yes, she did. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then some. Mm-hmm.
Since we're on the Friedman's relationship, one guest wants to know if there were any primary documents you used to depict the nature of Elizabeth and William's relationship that you used.
Yes, you can access a lot of their letters. So I was able to read them to get the tone. They talk to each other kind of in little silly and sweet ways. They also like to make each other jealous, which was a strange little aspect of it. They would say things about the other women and men to get it was a little odd, actually. That was one of the odder portions of the letters that we read. But I guess they didn't know that some random researcher would be reading them years later. But yeah, they did have some of that. They did have some journals. Elizabeth has a videotape or an audio interview that she did. NSA gave her a lot of trouble later in their lives because they had this extensive library with amazing things in it. And sometimes NSA would come in and take the files, and sometimes they would give them back. And they didn't ask permission to do so. But she did an audio archive that they have there that I was able to listen to. And the Cryptology Museum, you can go and just see some of their artifacts and things and access them as a researcher.
Did you connect with any of their family? I know with Virginia Hall you did. You actually developed a relationship with their family.
I didn't. Their children, I don't believe their children are living, and I don't go to grandchildren. I do go to children when I can, but grandkids, it's a strange thing when you're researching people. You start to know more about people than their kids and grandkids do, and that makes for an odd conversation sometimes. So if it's kids, I do like to give them the honor of talking about their parents if they wish, which they don't always want to. But with grandchildren, I feel like I know more than you do. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's an interesting one. And I don't mean, please go if you have in-person questions. These are just easy for me to get to on the laptop. Were the Friedmans teetotalers? Did they support prohibition, or were they just into having a job?
They were not teetotalers, but they believed in the rule of law. So they could kind of take or leave alcohol. And so since that was their job to uphold the law, that's what they did. And Elizabeth was pretty strict about, they would have tons of dinner parties. And if you were a guest at their dinner party, your dinner meant you were going to be having to solve a code to like go find it in the house. It was, and apparently they were very popular, I guess. But they never had alcohol, and she was really strict about it during those years. But as soon as it was lifted, there was always wine. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have some wonderful, they are very fine reproductions of their Christmas cards on display. And you did not get an ordinary holiday greeting from them. It was very detailed coding. So.
Yeah, and if you borrowed a book from their library, they had a book plate that they put inside that had a Mayan code. Basically, like, if you don't return this, you will be murdered. And the only way you would know, there was an axe on the picture. So if you couldn't solve what the code was saying, you could see the axe and understand. No, they weren't messing around with their library.
Mm-hmm. We have one more, or I'll let this gentleman ask.
Mm-hmm.
Just curious, have you been approached by any movie producers or Netflix or anything like that for to develop some of your stories?
Yeah, I had somebody reach out to me to develop this before it came out, which has never happened before a book came out for me. And it was a company that we did a little research, it wasn't when we started asking questions about the founders, that it got quiet. So that was interesting. And then I have a woman who has read this, whose husband has made enormous movies, and we keep talking about it behind the scenes. Leslie Zemeckis. And I asked her, does she know anyone who makes movies? Her husband made Forrest Gump and several other films. And she's like, haha, yes, I do. And that's where we are in the discussion right now. But I'm like, I would like to take this discussion further. I did talk to a mutual friend of ours who is on the board at a spy movie situation. And she said the hard thing about this book is a lot of it's filmed on the water, and most people don't want to touch that. So I told my film agent to send it to the producers of Outer Banks, because they do film crime on the water. And so, but that's it. It won't go anywhere. But yeah.
Do you have any ideas who you would like to play some of the characters?
Yes. So I do a lot of casting of I imagine the movie as I'm writing. It helps me if I get stuck. So for Elizabeth Smith Friedman, I very much feel that Emily Blunt should do this. She could bring some of that Mary Poppins vibe, but also other things to it. And then from Daisy Jones and the Six, Camilla Morone, I think she would make such a great Spanish Marie. She's Billy's wife. Did anybody watch it? I think she could do great things with that. So if you know them, just tell them I said that.
She'd be amazing. I loved Maria. She was such an interesting character.
Yeah. She steals the show a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. Perhaps the last question, though I'm not discouraging anyone. What happened to baby Betty?
I don't know. I lost the thread. I can't pick it up. I looked up Robert Peltz, Betty Peltz, all the Peltzes. They went AWOL. So she was probably the next Cleo Lithgow.
You did connect with some of the Coast Guard community, because I know we've spoken to
Yeah, my husband's cousin's in the Coast Guard, and he really started all this. He's acknowledged in the back because when he lived down in Key West, they invited us down there years ago, and that's where I went on the tour of the Hemingway house, and I fell in love with that and wrote Hemingway's Girl. And if you have read Hemingway's Girl, or you're at all interested, there are Easter eggs in this book because in the Key West locales, you will see people you recognize, but you don't have to have read that, just for fun.
So after Prohibition's over, did Elizabeth go right to doing World War II stuff, or was she doing other trafficking stuff for the Coast Guard? Was
she did trafficking for the Coast Guard for a number of years. Okay. And because the opium smuggling trade on the West Coast was she pretty much pivoted almost exclusively to that for a while. But the human trafficking started heating up too. When World War II came, then she pivoted and went to intercepting Nazi codes.
Well, thank you both so much. Fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Erika will be signing books outside the theater. And, we have this wonderful special gift for those who are buying books and came in person. Virtual audience, I'll do what I can for you. Don't be too mad. But before I release you, I want to let you know about a really cool opportunity we have here at the museum. The Spy Museum is looking for your expertise and charm. We are recruiting for the inaugural class of the Webster Docent Corps. Volunteer docents will give a highlights tour of the permanent exhibit and help bring the museum to life for visitors, help them navigate all of our incredibly cool stuff. So you'll see some flyers with more information about the application process on your way out of the theater. For those joining us virtually, you can visit spymuseum.org/volunteer. And I also want to encourage all of you to go to the website and check out our online calendar for upcoming programs. We have a really incredible in-person and online talk next week with this mysterious gentleman we were talking about in the back row. Our director, Chris Costa, will be interviewing Dr. Stacy Dixon, and she is the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. So another very impressive woman. And so Chris is going to do that next Thursday evening on the 13th, and we'd love to have you join us for that in person or online. Thanks for spending the evening with us. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.